The plugin we're going to be building is a class for creating custom content types. Since version 3.0, WordPress has allowed us to create content types, which they call post types. To create a new post type, you use the register post type function in WordPress core. There's a lot of options here that you can read about in the WordPress Codex, which I've mentioned several times as a great resource. I'm going to go through a couple of these options as we go through our example, so I won't go through them here. To get us started, I've created a plugin called App Bootstrap, where we're going to be creating our content type. We're going to create a content type called a quote so that we can build a random quote generator for our little app. To create this content type, we need to add it to the init action. So we'll add a function in line, and then we'll just call the core register post type function from WordPress. Give it a name and an options array. Just go ahead and create that options array. I'll paste some common options in here. I'm not going to go through all these in great detail. Like I said, you can go through the WordPress Codex and read through the register post type documentation. There's really good explanations of all these. The point here that I want to make is that if you want to create new content types using just the register post type function, you're going to have to memorize a lot. If you only ever create one or two, that might not be a problem for you. But if you create a lot of these and you create them in different sites and you're building up different sites often, this becomes a little bit of a pain, and it would be nice if this was a little bit easier to manage every time. The other thing that's a little bit of a problem is this idea of labels. If you just pass in an empty array or don't pass labels at all, WordPress will guess, but it will just guess posts for everything. So you need to pass in this fairly long labels array, which looks a little bit like this, which you can see is quite cumbersome and hard to remember. But not only that, it's using the same word over and over and over, which is the name of the content type that we created. It's either using the plural form or the singular form. So it sounds like if we just gave a function the singular form and the plural form, it should be able to generate all these labels for us. So that's what we'd like to do, which makes this a great candidate for turning this into a content type class. So let's try that out. Let's go ahead and get rid of this. And let's create a class. We'll call it content type. And we'll just start it off with just a couple public attributes. The type, an options array, and a labels array. And we'll use these as we go. First function we'll create is just our constructor, which will take a type, that options array, and that labels array so that we can do some good things with defaults inside. And then we'll set the type, and the options and labels the same way. And then all we really have to do is add an action here, like we did before, but instead of passing a function in line, what we're going to do is use a different kind of callable, which we may have seen already, where we pass an array, the first item being an object, which will be this, and the second being a string, which should be the name of a method on that object. So we're going to call our method register. And in here, we can just call register post type. Now, this isn't going to work entirely because we need the labels to actually be an item inside of this options array. And right now, we haven't done that. But we didn't do that for a reason, because we want to actually set some defaults. Let's first take care of these options defaults. We always want public to be true. I've never found a use for a content type that isn't public. And then supports, which defines the core fields that a content type will support inside the editor. So we're going to go the title, which is that big title bar. This is the WYSIWYG for editor. We want to keep track of revisions, and we want a thumbnail. And we might come back in here and actually add some more things later, but that's a good default. We can actually, our quote could actually be whatever we wanted it to, but by default, these are pretty much always what we want. So I'll leave those there. And then our options can simply take the options passed in and add in our default options. And anything that's been defined in options here will take precedence. And if it's not defined there, our default will take it over. But labels is a little trickier. We can't just make a default labels array because we actually need access to the type. And putting that all in here, kind of mixed up with the constructor, doesn't seem like a great idea. So we're going to create a new function called default labels. And what we want this function to do is just return a created array of default labels that intelligently guesses what we want it to guess based on the type that was passed into this constructor. Let's look at an example. Here's the array we're going to return, and it looks a lot more complicated than it is. Or we need some sort of pre-default almost to say, if you didn't pass a plural or you didn't pass a singular, we need some way of setting those first. So rather than being too confusing and calling those defaults, we're going to call those required labels, because we absolutely need these. So if you didn't pass them in, we're going to have to set them for you. And all we'll do is uppercase the name of the type that you passed. So if we passed quote, it'll uppercase that Q, and it'll be quote. So now the singular name is quote, and the plural name is quote. This is a little better because it's at least uppercase, but it's obviously not great because we want the plural name to have an S at the end. You could do some interesting things here. You can use, Symfony has an inflector class that will actually really intelligently guess plural forms of words. So you could look into that. For our purposes, though, we're just going to assume that the person's going to at least pass in either the singular name or the plural name or both, so that we know for sure. So for our case, quote is the singular name. We don't have to pass that. So we'll eventually pass the plural name of quotes, and then all the labels will be taken care of for us. So this will work the same way. And now, to set the labels item on the options array, we'll actually get back our default labels. So now we have a really intelligent and somewhat robust way of handling default labels, so that we don't have to worry about this kind of thing every time we create a content type. So that's all that our class should need, so that we can create a content type very easily. So at the bottom here, let's just go ahead right inside this plugin, and we'll say quotes equals new content type. We'll pass it our name, which is quote. We're not even going to pass any options because we're just going to let the defaults take over for us. And then our labels, all we need to pass is a plural name. And for that, we'll just say quotes. And now this one line is all we needed to define a full working content type. Here in the UI, let's just activate our app bootstrap plugin. And we can see now that we have a quotes content type right here in the menu. We've got good labels like quotes, add new quote. Go down in here deeper, we'll see no matching quotes found, add new quote. All over, all the labels are going to be working fine. So that's how we use a class to make plugin development take advantage of object-oriented programming inside of WordPress. But even so, it's still a little bit tied down to the WordPress system. That one plugin is the only one who can use that class, unless you are really going to be trying to rely on the order of the plugins loaded and all that kind of stuff that you don't want to worry about. It's really way too fragile for what you would want to do. So instead, what we're going to do is try to figure out how can we auto-load classes so that we can share them across plugins. And we'll look at that in the next video.